Well, hello, Lisa. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So, Lisa Smith is with us today, and I've had the privilege of working with Lisa in the past. And I thought, what a better time to help everybody hear about Lisa. Lisa is a mom, she's a certified parent coach, and she's an international best-selling author of The Angry Parent: How to Find Peace in Parenting Through the Message of Anger. Lisa helps transform frustrated parents who regularly default into yelling or threatening and punishing into peaceful leaders within their households. Through her coaching and online courses, and she also has a weekly blog, she helps families move from chaos to connection and cooperation, which I think right now we're all dying for a little bit more of in our homes
No, right?
during this pandemic. So thank you so much, Lisa, for being with us. As I said, I've had the privilege of working in the past with Lisa. She's taught me some great tips and tricks and ways to understand the perspective of where my children are coming from. My children are 11 and 8, and she's just been magnificent in helping do that. But I was just telling her before we started this that I probably need a little bit more after being in quarantine for 4 weeks and becoming a homeschool teacher that was never a career profession I wanted.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
thank you, Lisa. I want you to tell us, like, how did you become the peaceful parent?
Well, I didn't start that way. I was 14 years into my marriage when my husband and I decided to have a child. And I grew up in a really angry, intense yelling household. I like to say that if yelling were an Olympic sport, I would come from a dynasty of gold medalists. And, it's funny, but it's also really true.
Yeah.
And I used to say that if I ever had a child, I wouldn't treat them the way I was treated in my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And again, 14 years into my marriage, I had this, amazing son that I loved more than anything. He came out of the womb as a strong-willed child. He wouldn't even come out. We had to go get him. And he's been, strong-willed. We call him a full contact sport. And when he was about 3 years old, I noticed that I was angry and irritated all the time. I was reactive. I was yelling at him. And I was devastated because it was not the parent I wanted to be. And, when I looked around, everyone else seemed to be doing it right. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. And, as time went on, I would go to bed every night and I would say, tomorrow's the day. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to yell, like a diet almost, recommitting. And by 5 o'clock the next day, I was yelling, drinking Chardonnay or both. And I had so much guilt and shame. It felt unbearable to me. And one day when my son was about 5, I was yelling at him over something. I can't even remember what. And honestly, it doesn't matter because it was such a regular occurrence in our house. But I was yelling at him and he was yelling at me and I was yelling at him for yelling at me. And the whole time I was thinking, who taught him this? Why does he do this? Where did he learn this? And then it's like this voice came in the room and was like, you taught him this. You're angry and reactive and you're teaching him to be angry and reactive. And it was like, an epiphany. I literally, Rosemary, fell to my knees and begged the universe for a solution. And, as the universe works, the solution showed up in my lap shortly thereafter. I learned about conscious parenting, which I call peaceful parenting. And I learned about, I learned skills that I just didn't have. Many of us don't know what we're doing. No one's taught us, and we're repeating the mistakes of our own childhood, right? And so this is the clients I work with. And what we all need is we just need to be exposed to some new ideas where we care, about the connection before we ask for the cooperation, where we're still the peaceful leaders of our household, but we're doing it in a respectful way that honors the beings that our children are. So I started training, and at the time I was a venture capitalist, and I ended up leaving my job to become a certified parent coach because I felt a calling. I want everybody to know about peaceful parenting.
Yeah, you're definitely very, very passionate about that. That I know firsthand. And I think that's wonderful. And I can relate to that on so many different levels because I didn't realize it. Lisa, you know my whole story, but I inherited 3 children when they were 9, 12, and 16. I was 27. My husband was 29. Our own biological first daughter was 9 months old. So we were thrown into this pretty quickly and at a young age. And it wasn't until probably the end of raising those 3 kids to adulthood that I said, I can't go through parenting the way I'm parenting anymore. And it's not that I was a bad parent. It was just, I was parenting the way I had been taught traditionally, which doesn't necessarily work in today's society with everything. And then I had not really made a conscious awareness of what I was doing. And I think what woke me up and to seek help was my dad. One day I had gotten on one of the kids about something, and he turned around to me and goes, you can't do that. Like, you can't be that way with your kids, you know, and grandparents are always much nicer to grandchildren than they were to you. And I looked at him, I was like, well, where do you think I learned this is the way you're supposed to like discipline or react to things? And I'll never forget it. He slammed his fist on his desk and he goes, just because I did it doesn't mean it was right. And I was like, well, wait a minute.
Wow.
Where did that come from? And that was like the awakening moment, like you said, that you had, where I was like, well, if you didn't do it right, I'm certainly not doing it right. And so that's when I think we sought for, you know, seeking out some help from you and trying to make a better connection with our children and let them be heard and more empathetic. And it was great working with you. I know that Zach and I really enjoyed it. So tell us more about this method of teaching people to connect and be engaged with their children in order to get cooperation. What does that look like? What is the philosophy behind it?
Well, so many of us, we demand cooperation from our kids. We treat them as though they're robots who should listen the first time or should know how to do things. And children, up until about the age of 24, you know, and you've experienced this because you've raised kids now, you know, across the whole age range, they have underdeveloped brains. And again, these are all things that we just don't know. No one's taught us. There's no class in high school where they pull you aside and teach you how to parent. There should be, but there isn't, right? Yeah. So we have such ridiculous expectations of our children. They're going to listen the first time. They're going to do what we say automatically. They're going to understand how to do things. They're going to figure things out. And we often come at it. And listen, we all love our children. That's not what's at, you know, debate here. This is assuming that everybody watching this just adores and loves their children. But it's how we show up and treat them. And so often we're demanding cooperation from our kids, right? We're demanding it. And it doesn't really, humans aren't designed to function this way. You know, humans are designed to seek connection, and it is through connection that cooperation flows. And, you know, this is a ridiculous example, but I always like to give this. Let's say, Rosemary, that you work for me and you work in an office and you're sitting at your computer one day and I need someone to stay late. Let's say, I'm making this up as I go, but, you know, let's say I bust into your office and I say, Rosemary, I need you to stay late tonight. And you're like typing away at your computer and you look up and you're like, huh, what do you, and I'm like, I need you to stay late. Can you do it? Yes or no? And, you know, immediately you're just going to be like, what is going on? What is, she can't talk to, you're going to go home and tell your husband, Zach, you know, she wanted me to stay late and she busted in and I can't believe this. And who does she think she is? And I deserve better. And right. Yep. I mean, and I would probably not be a manager for very long because I would not be a very effective manager. Right. So what does work? Well, I knock on the door and I say, hey, Rosemary, you got a second? And I stand at the door until you say, sure, Lisa, come on in. And then I sit down and I might ask you, how's your day going? How's that project going that you're working on? Oh, yeah, it's going well. You know, what do you plan this weekend? Oh, you know, we're going to take the kids to the park and try not to kill each other in this quarantine, right? And then I make the request. I've connected with you. What did I do? I connected before I asked for the cooperation. And then I might say, hey, you know, I'm wondering, is there any way you could stay late tonight to work on blah, blah, blah? And then you're connected. I mean, this is how we treat adults. Mm-hmm. You know, we go to Starbucks and we don't barge into Starbucks, which is my favorite place, and say, you know, I'll have an ice cream tea, right? We look up at the server and we say, hey, how's it going? Can I? So we're constantly connecting with adults before we ask for the cooperation. But for some reason, we don't understand that this also can apply to our children, that we can connect with them before we demand the cooperation, right? Before we bark orders at them and expect that they're going to listen the first time, because humans are just not wired this way. So this is what I really help families do. I help them work on effectively communicating with their children so they understand the age appropriate interaction, which is something I know that you and Zach worked really hard on. And then we work on connecting with the kids, and then we work on cooperation. Because if I'm talking to you correctly and I'm connecting with you, then the cooperation flows.
That's very interesting. And definitely, I remember some of those pieces of conversation that we had. So can you give us an example of a common problem that you see parents having with their kid and how they would normally handle it versus how they handle it now after doing some training with you?
Sure. I'll give you a really practical tool that everybody can take home and use right away today. It's the 4 steps to get your kid to listen the first time. So often let me back up and say kids are, and this is funny, but kids have zero ability to multitask. They're not interested in it. Their brain's not wired this way. They don't do it. They do not have any ability to multitask. So they are also not scanning the universe for what's the next request coming in. Whatever they're doing it. If they're watching something on YouTube, they're watching it. If they're playing with Legos, they're doing Legos. If they're reading a book, they're not playing with Legos and checking in with their stomach to see if they're hungry and thinking about what time it is and thinking about what the next, it's 10 to 8 and I go to school at 8 o'clock and my shoes aren't on, but I'm enjoying this Lego. They don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. So if it's 10 to 8 and they're playing Legos, they're just playing Legos. And this applies to teenagers too. I mean, it's not just little kids. And what we're often doing is we're multitasking. So we're in the kitchen and your kids are in the living room. And let's say, your son's on his iPad and your daughter's combing her Barbie doll's hair. And it's 10 to 8 and we need to leave the house at 8 o'clock. What a lot of parents do from the kitchen is they'll yell out, hey kids, get your shoes on. And then, they're cleaning up, making the lunch, cleaning up the breakfast dishes, thinking about, what time is my first meeting? Oh, did I pull something out for dinner? Crap, I forgot to put the laundry in the dryer. I need milk at the grocery store, right? I mean, so we're doing a lot of things, but because we just barked, get your shoes on, we think our kids heard it and they're going to comply. Well, they didn't hear you because they're not multitaskers and they're not scanning, right? So the secret is to call out their name, to use what schools use, which is a pattern interrupter, right? So it would be, hey, Colin and Susie, and you say their name over and over and over again until you hear a yes, mom, and then you make the request. Please get your shoes on, it's time to go. And then you confirm that they heard you. Did you hear me? Yes. Okay, can you get it done? Because what happens a lot of times is you're in the kitchen and you yell, get your shoes on. And then you might look out and see oh, they didn't do it. So then you yell it again. And then you look out and you see they didn't do it. And then you go in the living room and now you're like, I told you to put your shoes on. And you're like, what, huh? Why are you yelling? Put your shoes on. And then they put their shoes on. Now, what your brain just told yourself is, and I hear this every single day, my kids only listen when I yell, right?
Yeah.
It's not because you yelled that they are listening. It's because you interrupted what they were doing. You got their attention. So I always say, get your kids' attention before you make the request. Make sure that, because remember, they're not multitaskers. They're not scanning for your next request at 10 to 8 while they're watching something on YouTube. So we have to get their attention, get them to look up and stop what they're doing and acknowledge you, and then make the request. And on your part, that often involves leaving the kitchen and coming over to them. touching them on the shoulder, calling their name over and over and over again in a gentle way before they look up, you know, to then say, hey, 10 to 8, we need to go put that down and go get your shoes on. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is communication and connection before cooperation versus just barking the cooperation from the kitchen. You have like maybe less than 1% chance of being successful when you're barking it from the kitchen.
Yep. I remember you teaching us to always ask what we asked as well. Like, especially when they're younger, say, what did you hear me? Yes. Well, what did you hear me say? And then have them repeat it back to you, because that was always something that we struggled with in trying to get them to do things. And to this day, it's something I use. I'm like, well, what did I ask you to do? Like, okay, what was the request?
Yeah. I mean, so I have a 15-year-old, and sometimes I say to him all the time too, what did I ask you? And he looks at me, he's like, I have no idea. And I don't get frustrated. I'm like, great. Now I know you didn't get it the first time. Let me state it again. You know, I need you to go put the dishes away. Oh, okay. You need me to put the dishes away. Because again, their brain doesn't switch gears like ours does.
Okay, on a different matter, with now going into more of what we're dealing with the pandemic, which this still applies, screen time. You know, all of the schools that I know of are going to online digital learning classes, and that's a lot of screen time, and they're doing activities that are more school related than video games. But you and I have had conversations about video games and TV, and what that does to the child's brain, and why, like my son, for example, when he plays video games, comes out upset and irritable and rebellious and kind of a monster. And my daughter is a way different. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Well, I think a lot of times, particularly strong-willed kids, this seems to really ring true for strong-willed kids. Too much time doing anything leaves them aggressive and uncooperative. We really seem to feel it with electronics because they're getting all this stimulation and they're getting all of this reward, and it dries the brain out a little bit. It's you know, it's called the digital drug for a reason, you know, because it's almost like, you know, heroin, and the pleasure center just fires so much that the brain gets exhausted. And then while they're in that pleasure center, they're also not checking in with themselves. Am I tired? Do I need food? Do I need to go to the bathroom? Do I need to hydrate? Right? So they're sort of depleting all their resources while their pleasure center is overextending itself. So I think that, you know, one of the things that I've been talking a lot about right now is most of us are not trained in homeschooling. We're not even interested in it. I mean, there's a reason we don't homeschool our kids. And so we just need to be gentle with everybody. You know, I don't think there's much being taught in April in school towards the end of the year that isn't going to be reviewed in the next school year or in college, or, you know, moving from one grade to another. So I think the intent right now is to connect and be gentle rather than forcing things, you know, these deadlines and these rules. And so a couple things that help are taking breaks. You know, setting time limits. We're going to study for 45 minutes, and we're going to get done whatever we can get done in 45 minutes, and then we're going to take a 15-minute break. You know, a lot of us, like in a perfect world, our kids would sit at the kitchen table and work for 4 hours uninterrupted so that we could get work done. But again, that's not the brain of a kid. You know, this is why if you study in elementary school, they do a lot of different subjects. They work for 30 minutes and then they get up and move around, and then they work on something else. And then they might, you know, get up from their desks and go sit in groups of 3 to read on the floor. And then they get up from that and line up to go to lunch. And you know, then in junior high and high school, kids are changing classrooms every 40 to 50 minutes. Again, to get up, get that energy flowing. So even though you're homeschooling your kids, think about this, like create patterns and rhythms and routines where they're taking a break. So maybe you do 3 45-minute sessions a day, let's say, right? And you say, listen, we're going to get done what we can get done in 3 45-minute sessions. If your kid's not an independent learner and you have to be right there with them, or you have a kid in elementary school, you know, we're going to do 3 or 2 sessions. And in between, we're going to take a break and go outside and run around or make lunch, or, you know, get them doing activities. Where I think kids run into problems is if they're sitting on these devices all day with no break, no chance to regulate. It's called down regulating the brain and let it even itself out. And the other problem, which I know you and I have talked about, Rosemary, is if they overdo it on electronics, when they come off electronics, the real world looks dull to them, right? We've talked about this. So yeah. This is the other reason to take lots of little breaks. If your kid is on a computer for 4 hours straight, followed by an hour of Xboxing, and then you want to go for a walk, he's going to be like, that's stupid. I don't want to do that. And you're like, what? Or let's say let's make something up. Let's say you have a horse in your backyard. Most of us don't, but let's just go with that. And he loves his horses more than anything. Like, he loves his horse. And, you know, he's been online for 3 hours and then gaming for 2. And you say, okay, come on, Joshua, time to go outside and feed the horse. Like, I don't want to feed the horse. That's stupid. And you're like, what? Well, it's because the real world looks dull. And so this is, you know, lots of little breaks from the electronics and have other things to do.
Okay, that's excellent advice as well. And so what other quick tips or tricks do you have up your sleeve for the quick crash course on on pandemic homeschooling?
Well, here's my number one piece of advice. It's a question that I want you to ask yourself. What can you do to make sure during this time your kids feel successful? Because so much of this time right now, the temptation is to be about all that's not getting done. And kids need to experience a lot of small successes. It builds their pleasure center. It helps them feel good about themselves. It helps them want to try. And so, you know, at a minimum, spend as much time focusing on what they're doing well as what they're not doing well. Let's say that, you know, you have a kid that's struggling with online learning. You know, maybe it's let's go with an 8-year-old little boy that's fidgety to start, has trouble sitting still, doesn't love school. I mean, here's the thing about school. I have a lot of empathy for kids. We stripped away, for most kids, all the best parts of school, right? We took away the socialization. We took away recess. We took away staying in touch with their best friends. We took away lunch. We took away PE. We took away getting rewards or accolades from teachers. We took away community, and we left them with the crappiest pieces of school, the learning, right? Yeah. For most kids. And we gave no notice, and we can't tell them when they're going to get it back. So they're already like struggling. And if they're not feeling really successful, there's no connection, and it's hard to get them to cooperate. So if we're spending our day with things like, sit still, sit up, stop doing that, come on, we got to go, let's get going, I have a meeting, your room is a mess, right? They're not feeling super successful. So catch them doing silly things successfully. Wow, you slept really well last night. Well done. You got up this morning. Way to go. You're making an effort with your schoolwork. Nice job. You'd be surprised how much helping them feel successful breeds more success and breeds them wanting to please even more. And at a minimum, it will cut down on the storming in the home, because kids are driven really for pleasure. I mean, to enjoy life. They're all about play. And we've taken a lot of that away from them. So we can help them by feeling really successful right now in the little things. I mean, honestly, it could be, you got dressed. Hey, wait, well done. You get dressed like no other. You are so good at that. Or maybe they pick out their clothes, right? Oh my gosh, you did a great job. then their brain's going to be like, well, what else can I do a great job at? And then you might throw in, hey, why don't you go try to make your bed every morning? Oh, look at you. You made an effort. Okay. Maybe it didn't get made very well. The pillows aren't in place and it doesn't look great, but praise the efforts that they're making at things.
Yeah, it's a really difficult time for them. And I agree with you on helping them be successful in what they're trying. I think for me, and I'm very type A and Zach's very type A, and we're very, very over the top and trying to make sure is every assignment turned in and I think we've had to get away from that and just be like, they'll let us know if they're missing something. We'll work with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I agree, I think one of the hardest challenges with this is excellent advice, even in an everyday setting, but even for us right now, like I know for me transitioning to working from home, or we're having to work from home and not having an office to go to when I'm not on dairies, is something that it kind of messed with my mind for a while. It took me about 2 weeks to wrap my head around what is this, and the efficiency of being productive really affected me because I'm used to being so productive, and all of a sudden I'm treading water and I don't know which way's up. And I think having kids do the same thing, it was kind of like, how am I supposed to lead them in a time when I can't even lead myself?
Yeah.
And that was a struggle. But I think that's something that we have to do, is have grace for ourselves, that, maybe today we might yell a little and maybe tomorrow we'll do better, and having that little bit of grace, which is always what I loved about working with you. You never let parents feel guilty or ashamed, and you heard every story with open ears and being willing to have that conversation. And so I loved working with you, and I still love hearing your stuff. So it's absolutely amazing.
Can I add one thing to what you just said?
Go ahead.
I think the other piece of advice I have for parents right now is, this is not the time in our lives to be overachieving as parents or kids. I say all the time to myself and to my clients, average work right now, C- work is good enough. We're not trying to, bust the doors down and overachieve. And sometimes just acknowledging that and taking a deep breath in the house and just turning the intensity and the tension down a little bit. Again, you're right. If you don't get every assignment in right now, or, I was working with a mom the other day, and she's like a first grader. And she's like, but Lisa, we have to get all this done. And I'm like, it's okay. There's nothing that they're not going to learn in the month of April, that is going to ruin their life for the rest of their life. It's important, I think, that we, especially us overachievers, because I'm like you, I want to be the best at everything. And I've got a competitive family, and, we like to turn in A+ work every time we turn something in. And it's been a really great idea for us to just say, B- work right now is okay. Like, let's just dial the intensity down a little bit on what everybody's trying to get done and enjoy our time together.
I love that. That's excellent advice. What another thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and it wasn't on my agenda, but it made me think when we started talking, and I don't know if you're going to remember, but what, Zach was in the military. He's very rigid about his ways, and working with us, I remember that you just had such a way of changing perspectives on things. And I guess my question's headed this direction is, what do you have to say for parents who were raised with a really rigid, like, do as I say, don't ask questions, expecting gratitude from children or appreciation, I should say, for, shelter, food, things that, and I think we talked about this, it was a lot of fear from the past that was kind of triggering those thoughts. But I guess what I'm saying is, what do you say to the skeptic that says, oh, this is just babying children, or being too wishy-washy, or not being strict enough, and not teaching them what the real life's going to be like? What do you have to say to those people?
Wow, that's like 9 questions in one, but let's
Sorry. I was trying to dial it down to just a generic version of somebody who doesn't necessarily think this might be the right answer.
But let's start here, and then you kind of guide it. So what I would say is that dominant parenting is when we use our power to come over our children and try to control them. And what we're in dominant parenting, it often requires violence to get the job done. Whether that's yelling or punishing or but ultimately what we're doing is we're trying to control the child. We want them to behave a certain way, and we're going to control them until they can supply that behavior. Now, you know, does it work? Yeah. One of the problems with dominant parenting is it requires a 24/7 commitment. You have to be dominant all the time. And in this day and age where we're meditating and in touch with our feelings and, you know, and living the lifestyles that we live, it can be difficult to be dominant 24/7. So, and women seem to really struggle more than men being dominant 24/7. So then what happens is we're dominant sometimes, but then sometimes we swing in the other direction, which is permissive parenting. So if dominant parenting is we use our power to come over our child, permissive parenting is we allow the child to use their power to come over us, right? And that's the problem with, well, let me say that one of the challenges with dominant parenting is that you are essentially breaking a kid's will. And when you break their will, you leave them open to the influence of others down the road, which may not have your child's best interest in mind. You're not just breaking their will at home, you're breaking their will. And now others could take advantage of that. The problem with dominant or with permissive parenting is that it leads our children to be insecure because they really do want rules. Rules and boundaries help them feel safe and loved. So when there are no rules and boundaries, they're very uncertain, and it creates an insecurity because they're not really sure how to show up in the world because they have underdeveloped brains. Peaceful parenting is the middle ground where we use our power to come alongside our child as the peaceful leaders of the household, right? So you're still setting the rules. You and Zach are setting the rules in your household. There's this much screen time. There's you know, we don't swear. We don't speak you know, ill of people. We don't steal. We treat people kindly. You're still setting the rules at home. You're just approaching the teaching of the rules in a way that cares more about the relationship rather than the behavior. And the upside, the long-term benefit of that, the reason that I think this is worth doing is because when we use our power to come alongside our child, we're turning on the internal compass within them. So down the road, they know right from wrong because it's right and wrong, not because they fear they're going to get in trouble. We don't really want adults going around afraid of getting caught drinking and driving. We want adults going around knowing I don't drive when I've had too much to drink because I could hurt somebody or myself. I understand right from wrong. It isn't that I'm afraid I'm going to get caught. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I love that explanation because that's exactly what that was the question I was asking. So you nailed it right on the head. So Lisa, I want to touch base on what type of services do you offer? I know you don't just work one-on-one. And so I want to talk about how do people work with you? What does that look like?
Yeah, I try to serve everybody. So I try to offer really something in every price range. I do one-on-one coaching with people where we can go really deep and create a massive transformation. I also offer group classes for those that like to be in community and really find that they learn best by watching others get coached and being in a group. For a lot of us, it's comforting to just know we're not alone. We're not the only one feeling this way. We're not the only one going through this. Nothing's wrong with us. You know, we're not missing a gene. We just need some new tools. And some people really enjoy learning those tools in community. So for that reason, I have a signature course called Peaceful Parenting 101 that I offer that people can join. I also have a membership community, again, where people can come together with like-minded parents. We do lots of interesting things. We tackle problems in there as a community. I teach workshops. We'll tackle things like sibling fighting or how to deal with strong-willed kids or how to get on the same page with your co-parent or your spouse when one of you leans a little bit more towards dominant and the other leans a little bit more towards permissive. So I have a membership community and people can get more information like on all of this. It's all laid out on my website, which is thepeacefulparent.com.
Yeah, the peacefulparent.com. I love that website. It's a beautiful website. And I also wanted to just say your membership base is called the Beehive, correct? It's the
Hi.
community, the Hive. So it's your little hive of parents that are struggling or that want to learn more, that can learn more. And you have a special thing that you're offering our listeners and or watchers, I should say, viewers, that you're doing on your site. Can you share that with us?
I'd be happy to. So I put together this guide called Peaceful Parenting During Uncertain Times. And it's a collection of 6 articles that I wrote, really intended to help encourage peaceful parenting right now. Even if you don't understand all the concepts, it's intended to stimulate ideas and bring concepts into the home, like helping your kids feel their feelings, understanding the value of deep listening, how to set up a schedule, how to get your kids to listen the first time. So it's just an easy to read guide. And again, this is what it looks like. And I know you're going to provide the link to it. And so all of your viewers at any time, it's not just right now, but if someone stumbles upon this later, they can click on the link and go and get this guide. And it's really like an appetizer to step into a new way of parenting that creates connection. And it's through that connection that cooperation will flow.
And I can't leave this session without getting you to tell me your tagline that I love so much that I keep repeating to myself every time I find myself frustrated with my kids, which is
get curious, not furious.
Correct. I will be storming through the house ready to lose my mind. And I just say to myself, get curious, not furious. And then I have to calm myself and deal with the situation at hand. And so that your tagline has stuck with me for a very long time now. So thank you, Lisa, so much for being here.
It's so great to be with you and all of your tribe of people. I'm honored and thank you so much. I mean, my life is better with you in it. So I'm just so glad that I know you and Zach and your family. And I'm just, I'm proud of you for the work that you did to point your family in a new trajectory and to bring some new tools into your parenting. So well done.
Thank you, Lisa. I couldn't have done it without you. That's for sure. You brought a level of awareness and consciousness that needed to happen. So, and we talk about it at least on the weekly basis. So,
that warms my heart.
So thank you so much. You are impacting. So thank you for being here, and we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.